Hi, I'm Dr. Stefana Pescher, the Country Doc. Welcome to our 5th edition of High Stakes, a series dedicated to community outreach and education and support for the opiate crisis that our community finds itself in. I'd like to introduce our guest today. Today we have Melissa Bouchard, who's an advanced medical cannabis advocate. We also have Lois Arias, the director of the show, and our very special guest today, Gracelyn Guile, who is an author, producer, and holistic health advocate. So welcome, Gracelyn.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it's truly a pleasure. So, you guys may recognize Gracelyn from her annual SEC cable TV show, series actually. In 1991, Gracelyn sold her California public relations firm and retired here with her husband. They intended to travel, garden, and generally play tennis and have some fun, but life took a very different turn. Gracelyn's occasional bouts of depression were re-diagnosed as bipolar disorder in 1993, and an antidepressant was prescribed. Life seemed a little less chaotic, but then a year later, she developed some breast cysts and tumors that required surgery, and life kind of spiraled in a direction that was unexpected. So Gracelyn, could you please, begin by describing the healing process and how you recovered from everything and what led to your wonderful books and journey?
Thank you. It has been a journey of 17 years now, but
Wow.
it's in retrospect, it seems to have gone fast because I've been really busy. Researching I had not used any holistic, unusual alternative treatments. My mother had been a vegetarian. There was a health awareness in our family, but it was not, we went to regular doctors and did whatever they told us to do. And so when I was diagnosed, finally in my mid-40s, I had had depression off and on many times, probably as early as I can remember was in my teenage years. But I always just thought that when life got over challenging or overwhelming, that I got a little depressed, and it didn't last very long. Maybe 10 days or so, and then I'd pop out of it and go on with my life. But as I aged, and when I had my own business, I was under a great deal of stress, as other single moms who own businesses with multiple staff knows, and clients. It's not an easy thing. And so the symptoms got worse with age and with stress, and that's true, I think, for most mental illnesses, whether people are aware of it or not. And so after I had surgery the second time to remove more breast cysts and tumors, because as soon as the first ones were cut out and they sewed me back up, 6 months later, more were there. And I thought, well, I can't go on having surgery every 6 months. So what am I going to do? And I didn't know what to do, but I'd heard of a doctor here in the Mystic area, Dr. Deidre O'Connor, and she's a naturopathic doctor. And she was well respected even by MDs, and she was the first sort of unconventional doctor in the area. And so I contacted her, asked for an appointment to discuss the problem with her. And I said, what I need to do is figure out what caused these, because they came on all of a sudden. And that's not normal. No women in my family have cancer, breast cancer or any other kind. So I said, I want you to help me figure out the underlying cause and why these are growing so suddenly. Can you do that? And she said, oh yeah. So I said, good. And so I made another appointment. It was for an hour and a half, I think, and she gave me, well, in our initial conversation, she'd asked me a lot of questions about my life and my approach to living and how I did this and how I did that. So she came and she gave me sheets of paper that had an anti-inflammatory diet because inflammation can contribute to cancer growth and cause cells to mutate. And then she also prescribed, did blood tests and then prescribed a lot of nutrients that are essential to the body. And if I didn't have the right levels, she prescribed natural supplements that optimized my cellular food and things that the cells needed to function properly. And then she also added into the mix 1,000 milligrams a day of fish oil because they are anti-inflammatory as well, and gave me an anti-inflammatory diet, which is on my website now. It's free for anybody, and it was in my first book too. So I took all the stuff, bags of supplements, went home, cleared all the anti-inflammatory foods out of my refrigerator and my cupboards, and just said, I just made a dramatic, complete change of my whole life. And I also, later on, I also began to clear anything that was a toxin from my environment. I had been raised on a farm. I knew that you didn't need herbicides and pesticides to farm. Manure works just fine.
Right there with you.
So I'd always gardened organically, but my husband was responsible for the lawn care, and he was he grew up in the 50s where chemicals were king, and so we had a lot of discussions about that. But finally, I said, "Listen, you either get rid of the chemicals or I'm leaving." So there's
I'm getting rid of you.
So the chemicals went, he stayed, and I'm glad for that. But it was, I just felt my life is at stake here, and I'm not going to leave any stone unturned. I'm going to look at every possible cause and get rid of that cause. And having sold my business before I made the move from California to New England helped a lot because that reduced the stress that I was under. So I went home, I did all of that, and within about 2 months, I had much more energy than I'd ever had before. I've always been a fairly energetic person, but this was like, I woke up singing. It was just amazing. And so I thought, this is working. And within about 6 months, people would come up to me and say, "You look fabulous. Your coloring is great. Your energy is wonderful. What are you doing?" And so I began giving talks and lectures, mostly for free, I think, at first. And still now I often do a lot of free lectures. It depends on the organization. But just to share what I was doing and to encourage other people. And then I organized seminars where I had practitioners speak at the seminars. And so that's what got me on this path. And so I noticed changes fairly quickly. It encouraged me to continue doing what I was doing. And then, let me see. I still needed to find somebody who knew how to solve the mania. Because Dr. O'Connor was very upfront. She said, "I did my master's thesis on bipolar and I couldn't figure out how to end it." So she said, "I will help you do all that you can,
Right.
but
There was still a piece of the puzzle missing.
I couldn't find it." And I said, "Well, that was 10 years ago or probably more." I said, "There may be information available now that so much is on the internet." So I said, I'll let you know what I find when I find it. And so I found the doctors outside of Chicago. I made an appointment with them. The man who ran the clinic there, it was called Pfeiffer Treatment Center. I had read the books of Dr. Pfeiffer. He had been a he did holistic treatment of schizophrenia in the late 70s and early 80s, and very successfully. And so he had collaborated with Dr. William Walsh, who was running the clinic when I got there, that I went to outside of Chicago. but the place was called Pfeiffer Treatment Center, and I couldn't figure out how Dr. Pfeiffer was connected and why it was called Pfeiffer and Walsh was running it and founding it. And the two, I learned, had collaborated and with each other on opening this clinic. But unfortunately, Dr. Pfeiffer died the year before it opened. So Dr. Walsh went ahead with the plans, and he ran his medical research company as well as this clinic for, I think, 20 years. Which was an amazing feat too. So I went there. They had a great setup. They treated people all over the country. I flew there. I had a 2-hour appointment. They did lab tests. They did, you were seen by a doctor. You had a physical exam. They did lab tests. And then you talked to the nurse practitioner because she would be the contact when I got back home. And it was very efficient. And so that night I flew back home.
Wow.
And 6 weeks later, they sent me a report, and they said, here are the levels of things that are out of balance. And my copper levels were sky high, and my zinc levels were very low. And so they said they physically made supplements for each patient. Mm-hmm. So I was sent the supplements that they said I should start with, and they said they would re-examine, 6 months down the road to see what my blood was, and they would send lab work from here to them, and they would take a look at that.
So it was basically like vitamins and minerals and looking at your nutritional status.
That's right.
And then they made some decisions because they felt that deficiencies or high levels might be related to the mental illness.
Yes, and they knew they had enough experience by the time I got there. They'd been open for, I think, 10 years, and also the doctors who founded this orthomolecular treatment, the Canadian doctors, have been doing it for years, and they had annual conferences that I think they're in their 45th year now. So this was not new.
It wasn't new. But it was new for us.
It was unknown in the United States for the most part, except for about 5 doctors scattered across the U.S. And I had picked the Chicago group because it was closer, and I grew up in Michigan, and so it was easier for me. So, so we started out, and within 4 months, my mania was gone.
And it stayed gone?
And it stayed gone as long as I took the supplements, because the supplements were compensating for the inherited errors that I had. And they were able, by the lab tests, they were able to identify those errors and then make the supplements for me. And then they went on, I did 6 months lab work and sent it to them. And they then changed the prescription, the formula of the supplements that I was taking, and sent me a new set every month for those. And so it was very professional, and because they'd been doing it a long time and they really knew what they were doing.
Did they also recommend a particular diet?
They didn't. I was on a diet, so they didn't talk to me about diet because I was already doing
the low inflammatory,
probably. So I don't remember having that conversation with them. But now all of this was 17 years ago, so there's a lot of details I don't remember. Anyways, I do remember that the mania disappeared really quickly, and I didn't say anything to anybody for 2 months because by that time I knew that my cycles were roughly 60 days from manic highs to depressive lows, and then you have all the in-betweens where you feel normal, and that's great. And then you hit a peak or a valley. And so I waited through another 60-day period to just be sure that I wasn't going to, tell people, oh, I don't have mania anymore, and then I'm yes, and then I'm obviously manic, talking a dozen miles an hour, and doing everything. So mania has its benefits at certain times.
Most people like the mania part of bipolar.
I said to my first psychiatrist, I said, can you just do something about the depression? I sort of enjoy the mania, and it doesn't seem to be dangerous. And he laughed, and he said, that's not how it works. The two go together. But I actually had the last laugh because they don't. I ended the mania. Then I was depressed for 15 months. And then the work of Dr. Andrew Stoll at Harvard with the bipolar patients. He did clinical trials giving bipolar patients 10,000 milligrams of fish oils daily. And halfway through the trials, the patients were so improved that they took all of them off the trials and gave everybody the fish oils. And that's why his work is why many psychiatrists today, those that are leading in their field, prescribe fish oils to their patients, because those essential oils are essential to the brain health and body, and the fats are what are used to make the cell membranes. And the cells, in the brain cells especially, all cells communicate through the cellular membrane, but in the brain it's particularly important. And if those cell membranes are too stiff from bad fats, then they work more slowly, and that was the cause of the depression. And when I read his book, I had fish oils in the refrigerator, I'd cleaned up everything in my life 15 months ago, and so I decided I'd just start taking the fish oils he said in his book, I think 3,000 or 5,000 milligrams a day should work. They always overdose in clinical trials. So I thought, well, I've got them in the fridge, I'll start taking 3,000 milligrams a day and with meals and see what happens. And I can always increase the dose if nothing happens. So I took 1,000 milligrams breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and within 48 hours, my depression of 15 months ended.
Wow.
And part of that, the dramatic part of that was that because my system was so clean of all the other stuff from the many months of eating and drinking clean and staying away from toxins.
So it might take someone else longer if they didn't.
Because they hadn't done all the preliminary work that I had done. And so that was for me the last piece of the puzzle. And that happened in 2002. And so I have been bipolar free since 2002. And it was like this huge rock had been lifted off my shoulders. Life was easy compared to coping with a mental illness on a daily basis, especially for the first 42 years of my life. I didn't know I had a mental illness because it hadn't been diagnosed, because it wasn't severe enough. So that's when I decided, and because I was retired, thanks to my husband's offer to come and go travel and play instead of continuing working, and after 8 years of running a PR agency, I was ready to go play. So that was when I made major changes. But I also decided that I was so relieved and my life was so much better without this horrible illness that I would do whatever I could to help all other mental patients know that there is hope for recovery. It may not be easy, and it's easier now than it was 17 years ago, but it takes effort and a collaboration between the practitioner, a holistically trained practitioner, and the patient working together, and then you can get well.
Yeah, that's just phenomenal, and it ties into what we're talking about here, because as we've all mentioned, and Melissa, especially with your insights on a lot of medical cannabis patients who have PTSD, we know that, mental illness is really what underlies, in many cases, the opiate crisis, the patients that are sort of suffering from addiction.
Right.
So by fixing simple building blocks, it sounds like nutritional status and
getting rid of toxins, detoxing.
Yeah, and eating organic and healthy, another theme that we keep hearing from multiple guests.
Right.
We are able to actually reverse and maybe repair certain things.
Yes, and this is part of that process that that I think needs to be added into the U.S. medical system. It's getting there. When I first went to the Chicago clinic and I was working with a naturopathic doctor, I think at that time there were only 2 schools in the United States that offered naturopathic degrees. And now there are 7. So we've come a long way in 17 years. But I still know from personal experience in talking to people at lectures and on TV, through the TV, people come up to me and say, oh, I saw you on TV, and they always have a question or something, that most people really, this is news to them. They don't really know about it. So it's not common knowledge. It's knowledge that once you become aware that it's there, you can go to and you can figure out how it might help you. But it's not like going to an MD and they all say the same thing because they've all been trained the same way. And so that's why it's important to find someone who has had training in use of alternatives. Lots of MDs now also go and get that training to add that into their what they have to offer their patients.
Well, it's one of our first recommendations when we do a patient intake. We ask about how they're eating, what they're eating, if it's organic, if they're avoiding pesticides, do they have well water. I mean, these things for us are now so basic. And also the testing of vitamins and minerals, because there's an epidemic of nutritional deficiency that we haven't seen this is new. This is in the last 5 years. We're seeing vitamin B1, 2, 3, 6, 12, folate, iron, magnesium, catastrophic levels for no apparent reason.
It's because
people are eating healthy, they think.
No, it's because these kids have no idea. They eat junk food, they eat processed foods. They have no clue because their mothers went to work and the mothers aren't cooking anymore. They're buying food because if you're working all day and you have a family to feed, it's not easy. As a working mother, you know, and I know. And so, but it crept up on us as a culture. Nobody was paying attention to that. It was just sort of business as usual. Well, now we have the unusual, where everybody's really deficient in everything because they're living on junk food or processed food.
Yeah.
That's the equivalent of junk food because it's been so processed.
Well, true, but I've noticed it even in patients who are doing better. And I believe it's because we have the chemicals, the pesticides, the things that we really don't even know about. The Roundup that's in our lawns that leaches into our gardens and water and everything. So it's causing leaky gut in patients. And I think that's part of the reason why we're seeing some of these deficiencies. And
they can't absorb it.
Yeah, and so when patients really go on like 2 months of organic, everything clean, really carefully sourced everything,
right,
they get much better.
Quickly.
I wanted to actually touch on that if we could.
Yes.
I think that sometimes we just forget that our skin is our largest organ on the body, and that we're eating or absorbing or taking in toxins and pesticides, when we're breathing or just being, right? So I wanted to sort of ask some suggestions. I mean, I personally understand like the turmerics and honeys. There's a lot of suggestions that we can use for an anti-inflammatory diet, but what about detoxifying ourselves on a normal basis? We can be eating good things, but just in our environment. I think there's a lot of environmental factors that come into play, or maybe folks who can't afford oral organic all the time, and things like that. What can they do on a regular basis?
There are things that they can do. There is, I'm trying to think of the website that has a list of all the foods, and if you can only afford...
The Dirty Dozen.
Yeah, the Dirty Dozen.
15.
What is that website?
I just Google search it. I don't know the website, but it lists
the
them
Dirty
out.
Dozen and the Clean
15.
But what I did too is at the beginning when I was working with Dr. O'Connor, I also instinctively began to reduce all my exposure to pesticides and herbicides, and I wasn't just giving my husband a bad time about the lawn. I stopped using any chemical on my skin, on my hair, in my personal cosmetics that was made with chemicals. They were all plant-based, and they still are. And that also, I mean, how many times do you shampoo your hair and you absorb all of that? And you're wearing all of the things that you slather on every day. What's in them? Yeah. And so I did a lot of research there, and I've gotten rid of the books now, but it's like I had a whole shelf on on what's in your cosmetics. in my office. So it takes commitment. It's much easier now than it was 17 years ago. But the books were still there. I mean, the information was out there. You just had to really know to look for it. And now with the internet, you can find anything with 3 words in a Google.
And a lot of it, most of the time, is just getting back to the basics and thinking about
Yes.
how folks used to live when all these diseases didn't exist.
Well, and I grew up on a farm, so I knew how people lived a very simple life. And so it wasn't scary to me because I didn't need all of these products. I brushed my teeth with salt and baking soda and was careful to have a soft brush so I didn't get rid of my enamel. But so there are lots of things that you can do, and the wonderful thing about the internet is that it gives you immediate access to information. My first book took me 3 years, and I was researching it through the libraries. My second book took me 9 months, and I was researching it all online. And there was between 2006 and 2010, there was 4 years.
So a wealth of information
Yeah.
in a little bit of time.
Yeah, and now I research by online first, and if I can't find what I'm looking for, then I go elsewhere. But I always find things that, oh my God, this is exactly what I wanted.
And the other interesting thing that I found in that was just folks don't realize just hydrating yourself.
Oh, yes.
Proper pH balance. Just a little bit of lemon water in the morning. Warmer water digests better, but little things like that really do make a difference in helping us purge
Yes.
things out of our body and
Yeah.
make sure our cells are working properly. So they say, I don't know if you agree with this, but they say that disease can't live where your pH is properly regulated.
And that's true.
So lemon water and baking soda baths, I guess it is.
Yeah, well, I do Epsom salts and baking soda to draw the toxins out in a hot bath. And, I have a big jacuzzi tub, which makes it really nice. But what happens is the tub is so big that the surface cools more quickly than if you're in a small tub. But they're easy, they're fun, and it works. I mean, my naturopath still prescribes it for
The
detoxification.
baking soda is real. Do you guys know that that's used
Oh, it
for
does.
radiation
Yes.
poisoning?
No, I didn't know that.
It's used. We should all have it on hand.
Well, I put a
I
cup
do.
of baking soda in a tub of water and 2 cups of Epsom salts. That's the ratio that
So
I was.
2 to 1 Epsom
2 to
salt to
1
baking
Epsom
soda.
salts to baking soda. And when I finish the bath, I rinse the Epsom salts off of me because I find sometimes it makes my skin a little itchy.
Is there a certain amount of time you soak for specifically, or?
As long as the water stays warm.
I have
or as long as-
I have a much smaller tub, so I'm gonna have to kind of circulate.
Well, or as long as you have to give to
Yeah.
soaking in the tub. I mean, life
didn't know
is
if there was-
everybody's pretty busy, and so just do the best you can. But it does work. It's prescribed by naturopaths all over the country, and for all different kinds of toxic overload.
I wanted to piggyback on that one and ask if you knew about chelation therapy and if you do, what you think of it. Mm-hmm. I don't know how many people in our audience know what it is.
I've gone blank. Describe
It's
chelation.
very rarely used in medicine. You have to be
No,
really overloaded with iron.
Okay.
And then they would give you an antidote, so to speak, that would draw it out of you.
Okay.
Usually an intravenous.
Okay.
If that's what you meant, Lois?
Yes.
I have done chelation, but it was different. It was a naturopathic doctor that was directing it, and so I did it because because I was bipolar. People who have depression or bipolar, severely or not, have a 30% higher risk of Alzheimer's disease.
Really?
And so, I can't remember, 10 years ago, 6 years ago, not in the distant, but not recently, I did a chelation with Dr. O'Connor, and she used natural, first we used because what she found, I asked her to test me for metals, and she found I had lead levels off the chart.
Okay.
And that came from growing up on a farm with an artesian well, and the family farm the house was 40 years old, and so there were lead pipes and lead soldering, and so the acidic water, artesian water, would draw the lead into the water, and I drank that for the first 13 years of my life till I went away to school. So I had really high levels of lead. 30 minutes, okay? And so I did a year. At first I started out because it was metals, and I had friends that had done chelation. It took them 3 years to get the metals out. So I started first with the drugs that they use,
Yep.
the DMSA,
Yep.
to trigger your body to release the metals from storage in bone or in your
Fat.
organs.
In fact, too.
Yeah.
Especially. Not that you don't have any.
Well, that's a different problem actually. But anyways, so I did that for 6 months, and then I became allergic to that drug. And so then she developed a natural formula using natural substances, and I did that for another year. And I have to say that the 2 days that I took the substances that caused the metals to release, I was exhausted. I had almost no energy to do anything for 2 days. And then you have to take the natural supplements to bring all the good nutrients back into your system that also get pulled out with the metals. And so it was a tough thing. And I didn't want to do it for 3 years. So I did it for a year and a half, and then I said to her, I need to take a break. I need to let my body rest and recover. And she said, fine, just let me know when you want to start up again, because you still got these levels. And then I heard about a treatment that is in my new book that's going to be coming out probably at the end of February. And with a practitioner in Old Saybrook who used a biodiversity homotoxicology method of detoxification. And it was taking the homeopathic remedies that were developed by Dr. Hahnemann in the late 1700s, and they had been revised by another practitioner in the 1940s, and combining those two together, and they developed homeopathic remedies that are delivered by eyedroppers in liquid form that you put under your tongue, and that causes the release of the toxins and helps to detoxify. And it's fairly complicated, so I don't want to try and cover it here. So but there's a whole chapter on that in my book. And I did that process myself, and then, which is why I became so confident enough of its effectiveness. I started it in February, and by August, all the toxins and pathogens were gone too, parasites and things that I didn't know that didn't show up on any of the things. So it was really good.
So that's excellent. And, can you comment on people that had mercury fillings that were never removed and causing a lot of similar issues, actually, mercury poisoning? Do you have those? You need to get those out.
I had mercury fillings that were put in when I was married to my first husband. He was doing his Vietnam War stint in the military. So I had access to military doctors, and I worked on a military post as a secretary. And so they they discovered that I had like 10 cavities that had never been treated. But that when I went on birth control pills is when I got all those cavities.
It happens sometimes.
And so, so they installed all of these fillings all at once. So 30 years later, all those fillings started to fall apart, just as I was starting to become aware of the damage of mercury and all of that.
Here we go.
And so I just said, take them all out and put biocompatible components in place. And so they did. So I have been, when I started this, before I did the detoxing and knew about the lead, I knew that I would have mercury because I had the fillings. And also, if you eat fish, you get mercury in fish if you're not aware of the fish that you're eating. So, so I just had all of those replaced. And even then, when Dr. O'Connor tested me for lead levels, 10% mercury levels too. So. So I still had mercury in spite of having those out.
I just wanted to make the public aware that that's something really important that you can fix actually, relatively simply, and you should fix.
If you can afford it. And we come back to affordability for a lot of people. They have, You know, if you have major mental illnesses, lots of these people do not have jobs. And there's a lot of things that they can't do, and a lot of things that they do that they shouldn't do, because they just try to make themselves feel good in the moment. And so I'm not too critical, but I understand the need to raise awareness, because through that they learn what might help them. And so I totally agree with what you're saying.
So you had a wonderful suggestion about those drops, and you mentioned that they were affordable, something like $50 a month, which is a lot cheaper than a lot of the medications that we're seeing patients being prescribed, SSRIs and other things for depression and
Right.
bipolar and some very expensive medications out there. And you feel that that really does the job.
Well, homeopathy does the job, which is why, even though it was created 200 years ago, this is the first chapter in my new book that's coming out about restoring your child's mental health.
Excellent.
And the first chapter is on homeopathy, because it's the safest, most effective, inexpensive treatment available. And it works. And it's been around for 200 years. And it is now, I wrote down this, it is now used by over 500 million people in the world on regular basis. Its consistent effectiveness combined with the low cost and safety have resulted in it being covered by the national health systems in 42 countries, but not the United States.
Well, isn't that interesting? I wonder why
course.
that is.
Couldn't have anything to do with the pharmaceutical intervention in our political systems.
I wonder.
The legislative groups. we could go off, but we won't.
We won't.
We'll stay on a positive tangent. Anyhow, that's why we try to raise awareness, is because they're not going to hear it from the conventionally trained physicians. So homeopathy and this homeotoxicology is a later version of homeopathy, because the homeopathy was developed 200 years ago, and the illnesses that people have, and when you use homeopathy, it's only one remedy at a time. And so it's very specific to that individual and all the symptoms that they're dealing with. But when you use homeotoxicology, they've realized that in today's world, people are overloaded with toxins, pathogens. The toxic load that we carry is surprising that we can even think, I think. And so this is what I used to finish my detoxification process that I started with Dr. O'Connor, because it was easier, it was simpler, it was faster, and I didn't have the 2 days of exhaustion. I felt fine when she got what the remedies working for me. So
That's great.
Do you have that on your website?
No, it's in my book.
Okay.
I'm sorry, but I did the research for this book 2 years ago when I was serving on, here's the book, that's the new one that's coming out.
Very nice.
And I did the research because I was asked, because of the impact of my first 2 books, and I'll talk about them in a minute. I was asked to serve on the Children's Mental Health Task Force that was formed as a result of the Newtown school shootings. And the reason that I got asked to serve is actually I volunteered. After the Newtown school shootings, where most people know, Adam Lanza shot his mother, and then he shot 26 other people, 6 adults and 20 children, at the Sandy Hook Elementary School. And so I used to own a PR agency, and I did national publicity for wineries, and so I pay attention to what the media is covering. And after this horrendous shooting, the only thing they covered for the next 2 news cycles was gun legislation.
Yeah, well, conveniently.
And
Yeah,
so I
not
thought,
mental health.
I realized that the average reporter knows nothing about mental health, and so they would have no way of knowing the facts that I knew, was that for the past 20 years, all of the shooters have either been going on psychiatric drugs or coming off psychiatric drugs. And that abrupt change triggers violent behavior. And I also made notes of this because I wanted to get, I don't remember all of these things after I've written them in a book several years ago, but psychiatric antidepressants are well documented as triggering mania, psychosis, hostility, aggression, and suicidal thoughts. Many experts believe homicidal thoughts should be added to this list, despite 99 regulatory warnings from 10 countries and the European Union. Nothing changes. Many people hate their meds, but their doctors in this country are not trained to give them anything else. And so I think that is really another issue that we need to look at as a country. We're spending 20% of our gross domestic income on medicine. And that means everybody's sick. And so why are we not doing something about it instead of just continuing the same old, same old? And it's because bureaucracies don't change unless they're forced to. So how are we, I love what's happening now in a way because all of these men who have preyed on women are getting really taken to task, and they're losing their jobs and their prestige and all sorts of things. And I think we should form some sort of a women's coalition to improve the medical system. It's the only way it'll get done. We're the ones that take care of our family's health. Do you agree?
Absolutely. You're preaching to the choir,
I
sister.
know. Okay, well, sing that tune whenever you get a chance. So anyways, we're getting away from the topic, but the other two books, when I finished Healing Myself in 2002, my first book took 3 years to research because I had no scientific background. And so I didn't even take high school chemistry. So I researched, I wrote the book to help other patients. I had a New York publisher. They wanted a lot of science in the book. And so it had all the science and it had a lot of footnotes. But it was written in plain English. I knew that the average reader needed to be able to understand this. And especially people with mental illnesses are more challenged in reading, and I know that too. So I met everybody's agendas and I got the book out. And as a result of the science in that book, I was invited to give 7-hour continuing education lectures to medical practitioners.
Excellent.
And I gulped and I said, when do I have to do this? And they said 6 months from now. I said, okay, I can do that. And so I spent that 6 months researching and creating a 7-hour lecture for doctors. And I gave it in 8 cities across the country. But they were thrilled. They had not learned any of this in medical school, and they were really very grateful for me being there. And they laughed at the way that I pronounced some of the medical terms that I didn't know how to say, but they were kind. They said, it's sort of charming. You've got the facts, but sometimes the words are a little different.
Well, I think people go into medicine because they want to help people.
Mm-hmm.
And so most doctors that I know actually care and want to fix things, but yeah, if they're not given the tools and
they have
training,
limitations.
yeah.
If they practice outside of how they've been trained, they lose their license. And so I understand their concerns. And so anyways, so that book led to that. And then as I gave more talks to consumers, they would come up to me afterwards and sort of after the crowd had cleared, and they'd say, I have a lot of issues with reading and attention deficit along with the bipolar and the depression. And I said, yes, we all do. And so they said, could you just write us a book that gives us the steps to recovery without all the science? And I said, I'll do that. So my second book, by that time I had done a lot of research and reading. And so I knew that most mental illnesses, the basic approach is the same. What you do with each individual is unique to that individual. So this book was titled, Who's Crazy Here? And I answered that in the introduction. The drug industry is crazy if they think that anybody's ever going to get better from these drugs. And then, and I had gave bulleted, I had, let's see, I covered 9 different mental disorders, I think in 8 chapters, 7 or 8 chapters, and they were, and in each chapter I gave steps to recovery for a specific
Yep.
diagnosis. And so those chapters, and then there was a chapter on each diagnosis, and so the first half gave chapters that covered all the things that you can do to get better that you need to do for all of these disorders.
So it sounds very practical, like a
Yes,
handbook,
yes,
pretty much.
it was. First, it's
Yeah.
here's all the things you need to do, like detoxify, clean up your diet,
Yeah.
take these things, get vitamin D,
Perfect.
that kind of stuff. And then the second half of the book was the chapters with each of the diagnosis. And that talked about the things that were unique to that diagnosis.
Got it.
And all of that in 117 pages.
So pretty cool.
And it didn't have footnotes, it had resources at the end of each chapter if people wanted more information. And so that book came out in 2010, and it's still available.
You
And
had case studies in your books too.
the first book had each chapter led with a case study, because I spoke at a conference on holistic mental health soon after I decided to write, while I was trying to write this book, and I wanted to introduce each chapter with a case history of someone other than me who had healed themselves using holistic treatments. And so it had 14 chapters, and the beginning of each chapter led with one person's story of healing bipolar or depression. That was the topic of the first book. And so that gave them an idea of some of the options that other people used and that I would also discuss in that book. So that book was 214 pages and had all the science. And so the books are very different, and that's why I'm trying to describe them. The one is focused on bipolar, manic, and depression, and the next one is focused on 9 different common mental disorders and how you can what you can do for yourself and when you need to get a practitioner involved. The steps to recovery had bulleted, and it said when they needed to consult a practitioner. You can start the diet, you can do some of these other things, but you need, at some point in all of these, you need to talk to somebody who's a
Good.
doctor if you don't want to know the science. And then this book resulted as back to this Newtown school shootings. So I sent, after the Newtown school shootings and the media was so focused on just guns, I sent a press release to 900 health media across the country documenting that for the last 20 years all the shooters that have been going on are off these drugs. I gave the name of the shooter, the schools, how many people they killed.
Excellent.
Details.
You really did all the legwork for
Yeah,
them.
I did.
And how was it received?
Nobody printed what I wrote, but I knew they wouldn't. That's not how PR works. You give people information and then they go do their own research, but you open the door. Mm-hmm. And so, and within the next week's news cycle, the news stations led by calling for better mental health treatment of kids.
Good.
And so, but, news cycles come and go, and you don't hear much about that anymore. And so that's why I wanted to write this book, is that I think it's very important for consumers to know that they have choices. And especially parents are very concerned about drugging their children. And they should be. These drugs have horrible side effects that will impact that child for the rest of their life. They'll have diabetes, they'll have a lot of other issues, really serious weight gain, 30 to 60 pounds with antidepressants.
Not to mention the suicidal risk, like you mentioned, that's
Yeah.
a big one too.
So there's all sorts of reasons to not drug children, and I think it's important that I give parents the information that I offered the state of Connecticut after I did all that research for the Child's Mental Health Task Force that has not seen the light of day. The 2-year gap was that my husband died, and I have been going through that process of my own, so I didn't have time to work on it. But it wasn't deliberate. I had the research done, I just had to get the time. And that happened this last winter where I had time. I'd gotten moved and resettled, and my life was coming back from chaos into some sort of order. And so I began working on the book, and the layout for the book arrived yesterday on my computer.
Oh,
So
very nice.
I'm getting close. I hope it'll be out in February.
Dr.
Wonderful.
Pesher, did you want to ask her about her new venture?
Yes, tell us a little bit about
Oh, my
that.
my nonprofit.
Yes,
Okay,
that's right.
I've got 5 minutes, so I'll talk fast. It's there's not much to say actually, because I actually conceived of this nonprofit. My husband, I have to say, was 1 month shy of 91.
Wow.
So he had had a good life, and he developed a brain tumor, and he refused treatment because he said, "I'm ready to go." And so it went very quickly. And so I was able to turn my attention. I had to deal with getting rid of the
Yeah.
house and all of those personal things. But the other thing I could do in the winter is that I could turn my attention to finishing the book and getting it written. Because and so I started on it and got it finished and got it edited and went off to layout. But I had to put the nonprofit aside because I couldn't do everything that I was already doing and run and start a new
Yeah, it was
nonprofit.
a lot to do all at once.
Well, and the nonprofit is not a simple thing. So I have all the paperwork done. The state and of Connecticut and the federal government and the IRS have all approved it. So,
Especially
so
the IRS.
this month, after I get the layout of the book off to be published, then I'm going to start firing up the nonprofit. And it's Mind Energy Innovations. And it will raise awareness for all the treatments that I have advocated in my books and that are shown to be well researched, scientifically based, and many of them much less expensive than the current treatments that are being used for mental illnesses, and much more effective because they're treating the causes instead of masking the symptoms as drugs do. So I'm excited about this. But I took a little break over the holidays. And so I am getting the book finished and polished, and then I'll go off into the new nonprofit. But there is a website, doesn't have much on it. It's mindenergyinnovations.org. And or if you want, that just talks a little bit about the nonprofit and what we aim to do. If you want more information about my books or me, go to gracelyngeil.com, which is on the screen. That's my personal website and has more information about the books.
And your Facebook page.
Oh, please tell them about my Facebook page. She does my Facebook page for me and is great. I went from 200 Facebook friends to 2,000. Are we at
We're over there now.
over 2,000?
Yes.
So
Yes.
you're the Facebook maven. Please tell them about it.
Well, she's easy to work with. So you have the good material, and I had to learn about targeting and boosting. And I've met some lovely people through Graceland.
Well, a lot of my relatives actually follow me on Facebook. It's easier than me trying to keep up with everybody. So I'm very grateful for Lois's help because I couldn't fit Facebook into what I was doing. So it wouldn't have gotten done without her.
Well, I'll be expanding to other platforms soon.
Yes, Lois will be helping me soon as well.
Yeah,
And
I'm very excited about it.
it's wonderful. And we, would be really honored to assist you too. We are also forming a nonprofit. This is going to be mainly for veterans and retraining veterans in forestry and agriculture, but we're tying in children and farming and seniors as well.
Wonderful.
And
wonderful.
a lot of the emphasis will be on mental health. And we
Of
could
course.
certainly utilize some of your strategies.
Well, we can certainly collaborate in a lot of areas. And,
Yeah.
and since we enjoy working together, that would be fun.
Yeah, it'll be very fun.
Yeah, I think
So
the
we got
community is definitely lacking resources and just, creating that unity and information. As a parent, I think a lot of the doctors, unfortunately, like to just shove medicine down the children's throats. And my child, they tried, you have to try this many, and if this doesn't work, you have to try this, and if this doesn't work, you have to try that. And I was like, wait, my son plays sports, and they always told me that the brain is a muscle, and there's muscle memory, and if you don't use it, you lose it. And they're like, oh, no, he'll grow out of it if you try this or you try that. And what I think we find too often is they grow into it. They grow into these pharmaceutical medicines and just need more and more of them. So
Yes.
agricultural-based programs and just resources are so huge in the community.
Yes, I think I hope that we as a culture are beginning to move rapidly in that direction. I think we've been on the verge, but I think we're hitting a tipping point where it's happening a lot faster. Because schools used to say, if you don't drug your child, they're out
can't
of
come
here.
here.
Exactly.
And I don't think that would fly
Well,
anymore.
in addition to that, it's still flying, sadly. Not only that, but you can't even get the proper testing. It's if you won't try this medicine and this medicine, we won't send your child to this doctor that he could actually benefit from, or we'll put, we'll
The
specifically
electrodes, yeah.
diagnose, right?
Yeah.
They won't even do that until you've over medicated.
Well-
and at that point, how are we really testing, right? How
Yeah, what are we
we've
testing
created a
for?
different
Yeah.
Well, things are changing, things are moving, and all we can do is continue in educating,
Yeah.
you know?
And I
So-
think that's great, and I'm very thrilled, that I have wanted to come over and see your clinic again.
Soon.
Last time I was there was 2 years ago, so.
Time flies.
Very different now.
But
Yeah, it's very different now. We have
Yeah.
our own naturopath,
yes.
Kathleen Cannon, who started with us,
great,
and
great.
a wonderful chiropractor and acupuncturist.
Oh,
medicalist
good.
who's
Well,
all
I'll
this.
come and see the expansion, but I really, it was not just empty words. It was an overload of other things
No, I
going
know,
on.
I
Yeah,
know,
so-
Graceland. You had a lot going on, but we appreciate you taking the time to spending time with us today.
Oh,
It was wonderful
pleasure.
talking with you and learning. So thank you very much for taking the time.
it is my pleasure to be here and to have met you and
Likewise.
to see you again, Lois.
Yeah.
I haven't seen, we've talked and communicated more, but I don't see her very often. So,
Yeah.
but life is coming back to normal, and my normal is to really focus on holistic mental health and the advocacy and thinking of ways to allow people. And one of the things that the new nonprofit will do is I'm planning a medical conference. I'm not sure if it will happen in this year, at the end of this year, or if it'll have to be kicked over into 2019 because of I have to get, in order to have it be continuing education for medical practitioners, I have to get like 6 months lead time on
Okay.
the approvals.
Okay.
And so I don't know exactly, but I'm going to have holistically trained and experts in holistic treatment of mental illnesses as speakers
Excellent.
at that conference.
Well, let me know.
And so
Let me know.
I will be certain to let everyone know through
Yeah.
Facebook and through
Yes.
other methods. But I appreciate your where you've gone, and that we can continue to work together.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much, Graceland.
Thank
and
you.
Melissa, thank you
pleasure.
again for taking the time out of your busy life to share in the insights.
It's my
And
pleasure.
Lois, really, you are phenomenal.
Thank you.
And we appreciate everything that you've done for us too. And
Well, you've done plenty for me, the two
Yeah.
of you.
so we'd also like to thank the studio for their generosity and all the training and assisting and giving us all the time we need. And really, they are pillars of the community. So thank you very much, everybody.